Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're focusing, really zeroing in on a specific, let's say, high-pressure time and place. Arad, Romania. We're looking at the years between World War I and World War II.
Exactly. And this deep dive is really about survival. We're looking at how the Hungarian population in Arad, who suddenly found themselves a minority under, well, a new government, how they use this incredible explosion of print media, their local newspapers, magazines, to try and hold on to their cultural identity.
Great, and navigate these huge political shifts and just keep the community together, really.
Fundamentally, yes.
And the sources we looked at, they just plunge you right into that moment of shock. It's quite sudden. The changes didn't even wait for the Treaty of Trianon to be official.
No, months before. Romanian troops marched into Arad, May 17, 1919. And straight away, they're replacing the administration, Romanianizing schools.
It was described as a cold shower.
A complete cold shower, yes. And you have to picture the demographics then. Hungarians and Hungarian-speaking Jews, they were the vast majority in Arad at that point.
So this wasn't a small shift for them.
Not at all. It was dealing with a totally new reality almost overnight.
And there's that quote from the Rendujali Utság in November 1920. After Trianon was ratified, it really hits home.
It does. Something has broken within us. Something huge has collapsed around us. That captures that feeling, that sort of internal collapse.
And that became the challenge, didn't it? For the journalists, the editors, to somehow pick up those pieces and, well, lead.
What's amazing, though, is how quickly they seem to move. From that initial shock, that kind of historical stupor, as the sources call it, to defining a strategy.
And that strategy seems to involve print, a lot of print.
Immediately. It triggered what the researchers call the avalanche of print.
Avalanche feels right. An unprecedented phenomenon, a real literary fever sweeping through Arad in the early 20s. But I have to ask, with all that upheaval, new borders, economic shock, how did they even manage it, logistically? Paper, ink.
Well, it just shows the level of commitment, doesn't it? It clearly went beyond just business as usual. The numbers are pretty staggering.
Give us the numbers.
Okay, so between 1920 and 1940, Arad had 40 printing houses. 40.
Wow.
And they published 126 periodicals and 354 books.
Yeah.
All in Hungarian.
In just 20 years.
Exactly. Now, was it all, top-tier literary quality? Maybe not always. Some sources say definitely not. But the intent was obvious. It was about preserving their language, their culture, through sheer output. Volume was the strategy.
And this wasn't unique to Arad, right? This was happening elsewhere, too.
We saw similar things in Timișoara, Oradea, Alba Iulia, too. It was a regional phenomenon among the Hungarian minorities.
Okay, so the presses are running, the fever is on, but they needed more than just volume. They needed like a philosophy, a mission for how to actually be a minority now.
Precisely. They needed a roadmap. You see early attempts like that pamphlet Kielto So exclamation from 1921, but the really focused strategy comes a bit later. From Krenner Miklos, he wrote under the name Spectator.
Spectator, yes.
In 1927, he wrote these articles, Kisebbségi Ildem, which translates roughly to the minority situation or minority manners. And he basically wrote the playbook.
Okay, so what was the core of this playbook? What were the rules for survival, according to Krenner?
He laid out two main obligations, very pragmatic. First, the Hungarian community had to work out an appropriate functional relationship with the majority Romanian population. They had to figure out coexistence.
Right, makes sense. And the second?
Second, they needed to consciously educate their own community, train the internal forces, as he put it, to ensure they behaved appropriately towards the majority.
So it's about external relations and internal discipline.
Exactly. It wasn't about assimilation, not at all. It was a strategy for, let's say, measured, conscious endurance. Survival with dignity, on their terms, as much as possible.
That focus on coexistence really brings us to Arad's identity itself, because there seemed to be conflicting views on what the city was like. Krenner, the pragmatist, he seemed quite positive about it.
Oh, definitely. He lived there for decades, remember. He saw Arad as this open refuge for everyone, a place where 4 different peoples and all faiths met. Tolerant.
He used that phrase, a small whirlpool.
Yeah, he loved that mix. He described it mixing the fever of Bihor, the austerity of business in Banat, the romanticism of Transylvania, and the hustle and bustle of Budapest.
Quite poetic for a pragmatist.
Well, he felt this blend created a unique tolerance and allowed the Hungarians there to achieve things, autonomously.
There was a counter-argument. Centimre Geno. He saw Arad very differently around the same time, 1927.
Much harsher. He called Arad a city that does not strive for original colors, but it learns everything about fashion.
Ouch. Sounds like he thought it was superficial, lacking depth.
That was his lament, yes.
Hmm.
Shintemre felt Arad just didn't have the right intellectual climate to hold on to real artistic talent. He called it a city of unfulfilled hopes.
And the evidence seems to back that up, partly. Those literary magazines you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Franjo Zoltan's genius and Uj's genius. Santo Georgi's Periskop. They're avant-garde, ambitious, but they didn't last long.
It flickered out.
Unlike in Oradia, for instance, which managed to support major talents like Adi Andre for longer, Arad's literary scene, despite that initial fever, seemed to struggle to sustain itself at that high level.
Okay, so maybe the high-flying literary ambitions faded after about 1925 because the city couldn't quite sustain that kind of genius.
Seems that way.
But the more pragmatic goals, the ones championed by Krenner Miklos, those took root. Survival, building bridges.
Yes, Krenner fully committed to journalism from 1925. And he consistently pushed for that pragmatic political line. Build a bridge, cooperate with the Romanian state. He argued it was essential for the survival of Hungarians in Transylvania.
Which leads to this really interesting paradox in the sources, doesn't it?
The censorship paradox, yeah.
Krenner is the guy preaching cooperation, building bridges, being pragmatic, yet his articles were the most censored of the era. How does that work?
It's striking, isn't it? Over 50 press trials against him. He was sued for protesting things like monument demolitions, for defending the Catholic high school's right to advertise.
Wait, so his cooperative stance didn't actually protect him at all?
Apparently not. And that's a key insight, I think. It strongly suggests that the authorities maybe weren't just reacting to the content of what Krenner was saying, his calls for cooperation.
They were reacting to something else.
Perhaps they were reacting to the fact that there was an organized, articulate, resilient Hungarian minority voice at all. The moment the press defined its mission, even a cooperative one, it became a target.
Okay, that really reframes the struggle. It wasn't just about finding the right words, it was about the right to speak them consistently.
Exactly. Defining the philosophy was one thing, but they still needed the actual machinery, the infrastructure of the daily press to keep going. The financial side, the logistics.
Which brings us to the newspaper giants of Arad.
Right. The philosophical fortress needed actual walls. And you had two main players. First, the old guard. Aradi Kazloni, the Arad Gazette.
The establishment paper.
Backed by Stauber Yosef, lots of wealth,
Yeah.
authority. And it had staying power, published continuously for 55 years, right up until 1940.
And it wasn't just some small local paper, was it? Those Jubilee issues were massive.
Incredible. 200 pages in 1909, 156 pages in 1934. And getting greetings from international figures like Thomas Mann, Franz Werfel. It had serious prestige.
But it was conservative, and it had a rival.
Oh, yes. The challenger was Aradi Hurlap, the Arad News Bulletin. It started with a more liberal spirit linked initially to Jazioskar's Radical Party, and it really pushed Hungarian journalism in Arad forward.
How so? What did they do differently?
Well, under the editor, Major Bella, from 31 to 38, they really modernized. Switched to a clean three-column layout, looked much more modern.
Okay.
They used bold headlines, really inventive ones. Published 12 pages daily, which was substantial, included things like cinema listings, radio programs, adopting that faster, big city newspaper style.
Trying to keep the readers engaged in a tough environment.
And they had great journalists, master interviewers like Pinter Lajos. They built a strong profile.
And there's that little detail about the name change.
Ah, yes. In 1936, they officially shortened the name just to Hurlap.
Why?
To get around a new rule that required geographical names on the masthead to be written in Romanian. By just being Hurlap, News Bulletin, they sidestepped it.
A small act of resistance hidden in plain sight.
It shows that constant vigilance, doesn't it? The small battles for cultural space.
So you have these two giants, Gazloni and Hurlap, presumably competing fiercely for readers, for advertising.
You'd think so. Cutthroat competition, right?
But the sources talk about a cartel. That sounds counterintuitive.
It does. 4 leading Hungarian papers formed a cartel. But it wasn't really about maximizing profits in the usual sense. It seems it was more like a collective defense mechanism.
Offensive. Against what?
Against, well, extinction, basically.
Yeah.
The economic crisis of the 30s hit hard. Plus, the political pressures on minority businesses. Competing ruthlessly just wasn't sustainable. They might have all gone under.
So rivals became reluctant allies to keep everyone afloat.
Pretty much. The cartel did things like regulate journalist hiring, trying to keep standards up, prevent what they called journalistic dilettantism.
Okay.
And crucially, they bought printing paper jointly. negotiated collective labor agreements together. Sharing those huge operational costs was like a life raft. It eased the financial burden during the worst of the crisis.
That's fascinating. A business strategy born out of sheer necessity.
It allowed the core institutions to survive.
Even when facing competition from, say, the tabloids, there was one called Regal.
Yes, Regal, morning. Yeah. It was apparently forced out of the cartel. It tried to make it on its own for about 8 years
How did it compete?
by going for sensationalism. Social news, scandals. The sources give that example headline. He shot his wife because of a bad lunch.
Charming.
But apparently, even with the sensationalism, its readership was quite conservative and its finances were shaky. It seems the cartel's strategy of serious, coordinated journalism proved more stable in the long run. The fortress held.
But even the strongest fortress, the smartest business plan, can eventually be overwhelmed by political force, right?
Sadly, yes. As the 1930s wore on, the pressure just kept mounting. Anti-Jewish laws started impacting Jewish reporters and owners. The government restricted advertising rights for key community institutions, like the Catholic high school. It was like the state was deliberately choking off their oxygen supply.
Tightening the screws.
Until the very end.
Yeah.
Hurlap, that modern, innovative paper. It wasn't bankruptcy that closed it.
What was it?
It was shut down directly by the authorities. October 9th, 1940. Just closed.
So, after all that struggle, the decades of adaptation, the financial juggling, it ended with a government decree.
The fortress was finally breached, yes.
Yeah.
Not by the market, but by the state.
So we've traced this arc from the initial shock through that literary fever, then into this very pragmatic, business-focused survival strategy. What's the takeaway for us looking back at this today?
Well, I think it highlights something fundamental about the press, beyond just politics. You see, those high-minded literary goals, the fever, it kind of faded after 1925. Or it didn't become the next great literary hub.
Right, the geniuses left.
The institution of the press, the pragmatic part, it survived because it was essential, not just politically, but for the everyday life of the community and its businesses.
It was the infrastructure, not just the art.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like oxygen, as you said earlier. You had industry groups publishing specialized magazines like Erdelli, Ipar, Transylvanian Industry, often trilingual.
Practical stuff.
And industrialists, like a furniture maker named Reinhard Keule, they saw advertising in these papers as absolutely mandatory. They understood that slogan. If you are not present in the advertising market, you do not exist. The press was the marketplace. It was the community notice board. It was the heartbeat.
Which brings us back to that duality we started with. Shentemre lamenting Arad as a city of unfulfilled hopes for writers. But then you have Ignotus suggesting maybe Arad could have been the city, if not of modern writers, at least of modern readers.
And Critter Miklos, Spectator, the ultimate pragmatist who survived all those trials, he backed that idea up. He made this simple observation. The bookshops in Arad never fail.
The demand for print, for information, for connection, it endured.
It seems so. The market for reading, for communication, was always there, even if the star writers moved on.
So that leaves you, our listener, with something to think about until our next deep dive. Does a community's cultural survival, its resilience, depend more on the fleeting brilliance of its top artists, the ones who often leave?
Or does it depend more on the steady, often unglamorous, pragmatic work of the local journalists, the printers, the publishers, the people who keep the bookshops open and the press is running, ensuring that basic infrastructure of communication survives?
Something to mull over.
Indeed. That infrastructure might just be the toughest part of the fortress. Until next time.